You're listening to Pitch Talks, bringing you the game.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Bringing You the Game by PitchTALKS. This week, I'm very excited to introduce you to Graham Howe, who works within sport broadcasting. Good morning, Graham. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you very much, and pleased to be here this morning.
Well, I can't wait to get started. Before we start talking about what you do, I think it's only right to understand, what does sport mean to you personally? You know, where does your passion for sport come from, and where did it all start for you?
Well, sport to me has always been a massively important part of my life. I come from a very sporty background on my mother's side. One of my mum's brothers was a very successful professional footballer. I played at all levels of football up to international in schoolboy football. I was on the books as a youngster at Luton Town and Arsenal. Didn't get very far, various reasons, but always played a good standard. Was always one of the better players in the district, in the county. Always played in those sides, always played for successful schoolboy clubs. And after the professional football vanished, good standard of non-league football. Didn't just stop with football. I went to a rugby school, played for the school at rugby the whole time I was there. Loved badminton, tennis. I was a good athlete. I was very good at the 400 metres. So I think, to me, sports probably got me where I am today more than academia.
I suppose now I really want to know, from where you are today, where did then the professional career side of things? You're a cameraman by trade, but some of the venues and some of the sporting actions and some of the stuff you've captured is incredible. Where did it sort of start for you?
I think if you take it back to the furthest point, my mum would say to me when I was sort of early teens, that when I was a youngster, I used to always be asking her how images got into our TV. And she said I'd always be looking around the back to see if there was somebody in there. And she said, I was always asking how, the pictures got on the TV, who did it, what did they do? Now my mum's a nurse and my dad was a mechanic. So it certainly wasn't anyone in our family that had that kind of knowledge. But going back to being a little child, I think I was always interested in TV. Academically, I was average. I was probably more interested in sport. Around the time that you have to make those kinds of decisions about what you want to do moving on, I was always sort of still interested in TV. I loved football. I loved watching football. I knew that if I wasn't going to have a career in football, I'd like to still somehow be involved in it. And I knew that I liked the genre of TV. So I looked at, what I needed to do to get into TV. Now, being someone, early 50s, back then there wasn't the media courses and the film schools that there are today. And so I went and saw the careers advisor at the school that I was at the time. And they sort of looked into it for me. They didn't really have a lot of experience, but they said, have you thought about doing an engineering course? So I went to a college in the next town to where I live in Luton, and I did an OND in electronic engineering and computer technology. Because back then, that was sort of an engineering background was sort of seen as a good way in. Nowadays, I doubt that would be the case. I think you'd probably just go and do a media course and probably get your hands on the gear and learn everything about the industry. Whereas certainly when I started, you were pushed into a specific area. Now, I always wanted to be in cameras. So when I finished my course at college, I got a job within a few months at a facilities company in London back in 1990. And you started out as a runner, and basically you were around the kit, you were picking kit up from hire companies, you were prepping kit, you were putting it in vans, you were meeting the cameramen who came to pick up the kit at 5 a.m, and you were there at 10 p.m. when they brought it back. But what it gave you was the opportunity to get your hands on the kit, which I think is massively important, because you have to learn the kit before you can use the kit. And then from there, you move into being a camera assistant, which again is a role I feel is sorely missed now. I think a lot of people could do with being a camera assistant. I think now that the problem the industry's gone is that when I started, if you were out filming, there'd be 3 of you on location, and it'd be a cameraman, a sound man, and a camera assistant. I mean, the camera assistant pretty much had the bum deal. He was the first one in. He was prepping the gear. He was moving the gear. He was looking after the gear. He was changing the batteries, doing the tapes, doing all the donkey work. But it was good because you saw how a shoot worked, and whilst the filming was going on, you were left to your own devices to watch the cameraman working. To even some extent, watch what the sound man was doing, which moving into today's industry is a massive plus, because now I tend to go on shoots on my own, which certainly knowing the cameramen that I was brought up with, they wouldn't have done that. They would not have been interested in doing the lights, camera, sound, the parking of the vehicle, the lugging of the gear. They wouldn't have been interested in doing all of that. So the industry's moved on massively. But I look back at the time I spent as an assistant and I think what I learnt there has stood me in good stead. Where my point is about missing assistants now, I think a lot of cameramen start possibly too early. I think it's good to do your time. I did my time as an assistant. I probably spent a bit too long, in all honesty, as an assistant. But I enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed watching cameramen work. I actually enjoyed learning. I don't believe you ever stop learning in this industry.
You're listening to Pitch Talks, bringing you the game.
What would you say, for you was the best couple of learnings being that assistant?
I would say the biggest one as a cameraman is possibly to listen. Your ears are probably as important, if not more important, than your eyes. I think if you don't listen to what the brief is and you don't listen to what, if you're working with a director or a producer, if you don't listen to what they actually want and you just think, I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it, which in some ways you end up doing anyway, but you have to listen to what the shoot requires, what the client wants out of it. Because it may not be what you necessarily think they require, but they'll be the ones that ultimately have to deliver what you've shot. You're there to give them the best images that you can, but you've got to listen to what that brief is. I'd say another thing is don't rush. Try not to rush. Try not to be rushed, because that's when you make mistakes. The times that I will look at an image or something that I'm filming, or even, like I say nowadays, listening to, if I'm doing the sound as well, I always have a problem when I've rushed. And I will always see or hear something that I think, oh, why has that happened? And it will invariably be because I've rushed or I've been rushed. And the last thing I'd say is just be nice to people. We're in a privileged position. It's a great job. It beats going out and working for a living. Just be nice to people. I'm not the greatest cameraman in the world by any stretch. I think I've got quite a nice personality, or I'd like to think people would say I've got a nice personality. And I do believe that in not just camera work and TV, I think in all walks of life it goes a long way. And I think people pay a decent amount of money for a cameraman to be there on their job. I think one of the things they quite like is that you're nice and you're amenable and you're not just there to make money.
This is Pitch Talks.
When you Google, how to get into media, you said you have got the courses, but, say if you got to a point where you're like, got one career, but you want to change, trying to find those opportunities and trying to find, whether it's voluntary, whether it's paid, all sort of places that you apply for expect you to have some kind of experience already. But when you're trying to apply at a junior level role, that's ultimately what you're trying to get. You're trying to get the experience. So it kind of feels for some people that it's a dead end from the beginning.
Can I tell you a good story about my first ever job in TV? I went for my interview on my 21st birthday. That was the day of my interview. It was my actual 21st birthday, and it was in South London, and I live up near Milton Keynes. So this was back in 1990, and I'd had a family event organised for the day, but it was the first proper interview that I'd got, and I was really keen. And I think that, it being my 21st birthday, and my mum said, oh, could you see if you could move it to another day? And I said, look, Mum, these chances don't come around. This is a fairly decent company and I really want this job. And I know it's my 21st birthday and it's a big deal for you, but getting my first foot on the ladder was a big deal to me. So I've gone along to the interview. I've got up early, I've got the train down, I've got the tube all the way across London. I've then had a 20-minute walk in the rain because my birthday's in January. And I've gone into the interview and I've sat down and the interviews say at 11 o'clock and it's run half an hour late before I've gone in, and you're a little bit, thinking, wow, I could have done with this starting on time. But, you think, I've got to get in here. And one of the questions that I was asked was, why do you want to get into TV? Now, I hate that question. I don't think it's a fair question. I've never liked people asking me questions like that. Why did I want to get into TV? Because I think the fact that you've gone and applied for a job and you've gone along for an interview, and in my case, on my 21st birthday, showed everything why I wanted to be in TV. I wanted to go into an industry that I was interested in, and I fired back at the boss of the company. Well, why did you want to get into TV? Sort of stopped and looked at me and said, I beg your pardon. I said, well, you're asking me, why did you want to get into TV? What back then made you want to get into TV? And he said, well, I don't really know. I said, well, I've got no experience of working in TV. I've just spent 3 years at college doing an electronic engineering course that, in all honesty, I wasn't overly interested in, but it was a way to get into TV. I said, and on my 21st birthday, having had a family event organised, I've come down here for an interview. I don't think I need to really say why I want to work in TV. I want to work in TV because I think it's something that interests me. I believe it's something I could be good at. And I think with the right opportunity, I'll do really well. I went home from the interview thinking, well, I'll never hear from him. We came home. There was a message on our answer machine at home to call him the next morning. The job's yours. I really like the interview. And I think by being a little bit ballsy but polite, I got the job. Now, going to answer your question about experience, I think that's possibly the biggest area, going back to what I said about assisting. You get that experience through being an assistant. But because we no longer really employ assistants, there's that massive void of learning that's going throughout the whole industry. I think it's a real mistake by production companies to some extent. You don't have to pay people a lot of money to get them along as an assistant. I think a lot of people would do it for not a lot of money. They would jump at the chance to be involved. And I think what they could learn would be invaluable to the whole industry.
You're listening to Pitch Talks.
So I think then the next thing I want to know is you set up your own company. And when you set it up, did you know from the beginning what sort of your preferred client was?
The company that I worked at before I went freelance and started my own company was a company that filmed lots of entertainment shows, things like Time Team, Challenge Annika, shows like that, which I enjoyed, but I always loved sport. Through working for that company, I got introduced to a cameraman that did a lot of sport. And at weekends, I would quite often go and assist him. So when I went freelance, I definitely decided that as much as I wasn't going to push myself into just doing sport, I knew wherever opportunities arose in sport, I was going to massively jump at them. And that's pretty much how the career's gone. I mean, I don't just work in sport. I do a bit of news. I do some entertainment stuff still. I do some documentary stuff still for Discovery. I do lots of various things, but predominantly it's sport.
Obviously, I've seen, as you said, quite a lot of stuff on your LinkedIn and your website is documented, all the different types of things you've done within sport. I saw something with Crystal Palace players on there. Obviously, we briefly spoke about your experience filming at, say, the likes of AFC Bournemouth. What does a day like that consist of?
Well, to start off, it's a long day. I mean, one of the things that I don't think people appreciate when they sort of say to me, you've got the greatest job in the world, is the length of day. Because, like I say, living up north of London area, if you're going to somewhere like Bournemouth to cover a match, you've got to put into that a possible 2 to 3 hour journey each way. So wherever I go, unless it's Watford, Luton, MK Dons, Wycombe Wanderers, if it's one of those grounds, it's a 45-minute journey. But anywhere else, you're adding into the couple of hours. So the first thing to sort of realise, it's a long day. When you're on site, you do not a lot for the majority of the day. There's a lot of sitting around. There's a lot of time spent either on your own or with other people if you choose to. That's one thing that the coronavirus has certainly pushed, is that you spend a lot of time on your own. The broadcasters are quite keen that once you're on site in your vehicle, you spend as much time as you can in your vehicle. You sort of literally come out to do your job and then de-rig at the end of the day. I would say that you also have to appreciate that if you're not very good at sort of taking a long day, it's probably not the job for you, because you very rarely have a short day. I mean, even like say doing a Bournemouth, if it was a 3 o'clock kickoff on a Saturday, I'd probably have to be there around 9 o'clock, which would mean me possibly having to leave home at 6:30. You typically leave 3 hours after kickoff. So if it's a 3 o'clock kickoff, I possibly won't be walking out of there till 6 o'clock. Then depending on traffic going home, you could add another 2.5, 3 hours. I could be leaving home then at 6:30, getting home at 8:30.
This is Pitch Talks.
What other stuff have you done at the games?
I mean, it's probably better to start with what we do when we get there. So when we get there, we will all turn up. If you're working on an OB, so you're doing a match, you'll turn up at 9 o'clock. There may be some bits that we all have to do together to get the cameras finally set up, but usually they're done the day before. So we'll turn up, we'll go out, we'll check our individual camera. Once we've been told what camera we're doing, you'll go and check that that's all working. You'll then come back, have a cup of tea. Like I say, this is where the management of your time is quite important because there's a lot of downtime. Typically then you would have what they call a facts check, which is where everybody is on camera. The commentators will be in their position. Well, actually it'll be the sound supervisors, but there'll be someone in the commentator's position. There'll be everyone pitch side that needs to be in their positions for when the game starts. And we will go through with the director, checking each camera's job, each camera's position, so we know that everything works. We'll check that all the mics work with the cameras that need to work, and we'll just check everything is working as best as it can. Now, depending on which camera you're doing, you then may have from 11:30, 12 o'clock, nothing to do till 2 o'clock. You may then have another 2-hour window where you've got literally nothing to do. It could be 2 hours, could be 3 hours. It depends on what time you do the fact check. Other cameras, though, may have jobs to do. They may have to do pre-match interviews, live news crosses, get footage of the teams arriving. You know, there's a whole load of stuff that needs to go into edit packages that will be shown before kickoff, because all that has to be done by somebody on the day. Typically then an hour before kickoff, everybody will be on camera. And again, depending on what camera you're doing, you'll all have different roles then. And it'll be getting pre-match shots. It'll be getting warm-up shots. It'll be getting the players warming up. It'll be getting fans turning up in the crowd. Just getting more edit packages that can be distributed to the broadcasters around the world and things like that. Sometimes you'll be involved in doing interviews pitch side with foreign broadcasters. As we get closer to kickoff, that all comes to an end, and we'll just be told by the director what's expected of us on the game, that day. Just reiterate what, at the start of the game, certainly he expects from us. Then you're into the game. So the next 2 hours, it's pure game stuff.
Does that fly by, those 2 hours?
It depends. Does the game fly by? I would say it depends which camera you're doing. If you've got a busy camera, the game flies by. If you've got a camera that's not doing a great deal or it's not being used a great deal, then some games can drag. Now, the reason that those games tend to drag will be more because of the weather than the game. Because when you're doing a camera, you're not always aware of how exciting a game can be. You get a feel for it from the crowd. And that's certainly, again, something that being in an empty stadium during coronavirus has massively made more tricky, is gauging how exciting a game is. Because it's one thing for the players to feed off that energy, but as a crew, as a camera crew, you feed off it as well. You get into a game if the crowd are giving it some. So that's something else that we've really missed during the lockdown. I mean, the cameras that I tend to do, the games tend to fly by because I tend to be on quite busy cameras, and I like it that way. I like being excited and enjoying what I'm doing.
When you say a busy camera, do you get told where you're going to be placed around the field on the day?
Well, how it works is that there'll be anything from, you can do a football match with 4 cameras. You probably wouldn't unless it's a very minor, low-league game. But, typically on the Premier League, certainly during lockdown, I think we had, 14 to 15 cameras. Now, that's not a lot. That's because we had limited crew. Typically, I think it's around 22 cameras. And each of those cameras has got a job. Every camera on a game of football has got a role. We don't just all try and get the same shots because you'd end up with nothing. And that's why, again, I say if you've got a busy camera, it can be quite enjoyable. Some people may have a camera that spends a lot of the time just following a player. Now, that player may or may not be overly involved. It's called player cam. Now, it's a match camera, not one that I particularly enjoy. I personally like doing camera 1, which is the main camera angle that you see when you watch any game of football. Again, I think that goes back to my football background. I love watching football. So camera 1 is the natural one for me to do. The majority of the time, the camera that I do though, for BT Sport is the manager cam, which some people would probably say is quite a boring camera. But the way that we use it for BT is actually quite an involved camera because it's not just the managers that you're after, but you are watching both managers, but you're also watching the benches, you're watching the directors in the crowd, you're watching opposing managers in the crowd. You may be looking for the England manager. Then if something happens, you're listening to the commentary, and they may say, so-and-so, that was a great shot. Gareth Southgate will be really keen to get him in the next England squad. My job then is to quickly find Gareth Southgate so that the director can cut to Gareth Southgate and use it. So it's quite an involved role, which a lot of people would say it's a boring camera, but I don't find it that way. I find it quite an interesting camera because you're constantly thinking, you're constantly trying to give the director the shot that he needs that's being spoken about at that moment.
You're listening to Pitch Talks, bringing you the game.
As a freelance, how do you get involved with the likes of BT Sport?
In OBs, you're booked by a camera supervisor who will liaise with a director. A director will say, I like XYZ in my crews. The camera supervisor will, where he can, book XYZ. It's a tricky one because you have to break into the industry to get noticed. But once you're noticed and a director likes you, he'll tell a camera supervisor, I like this group of people. Where you can you book them?
What would you say where's your best places to film?
I mean, I've been lucky. I've done every World Cup and European Championship since 1998. I've been lucky that I've been all around the world to some massive venues. The highlight in terms of games that I've covered would be the Brazil World Cup final between Germany and Argentina. I mean, it's a shame it was an awful game. But to do a World Cup final in the Maracanã in Rio, I think you'd be pretty hard pushed to better. So from that point of view, I've been very lucky. In terms of games at home, I think one of the reasons that I got in touch with you was I actually really love going to Bournemouth. I find going to Bournemouth as a day's work as pleasurable as it can be, especially if you took the journey out of the equation. I mean, the journey, certainly going home, has always been a bit of a pain. But in terms of a day's work, I've always found going to Bournemouth a real joy. I think that as a club, they treat broadcasters, and this is my experience, they treat broadcasters, they treat the crew very, very well. They're very accommodating. They're very polite. You go to some grounds, and I won't name them, they make you feel like you're a massive outsider. They make you feel like you're a pain to be involved with. They make you feel like you're trouble. And that's a shame because I personally believe that it all works well together. I think the broadcaster helps the club's exposure. I think without the broadcaster, there isn't the money in sport that there is. I think the Premier League does very well out of the broadcasting. I think that the coverage of the games on Sky and BT is amazing. I think without the broadcasting, there would be nowhere near the money. We all know that. The wages of the players is based around the broadcasting. But I think that as a cameraman that turns up, I'm more often than not disappointed at the way that we're sort of treated and spoken to. And this is by the clubs. This isn't by the broadcasters. The broadcasters are great. They look after us, really well. But the clubs can just be a bit, thoughtless. We're there to do a day's work. We're there to help them as much as they're there to help us. At Bournemouth, I've never, ever had that experience. You turn up, the security guards have a smile, they shake your hand, the stewards ask how you are. They say, where are you today? Where's your camera? I'm up there, right? Any problems, just let us know. We'll see what we can do. The managerial staff, the players, the coaches, the manager, the assistant manager have always just been nothing but charming. And I'm talking about the instances where you have to go down post-match and they may have got a really bad result, but they don't take it out on you. They don't make you feel like you're the reason for the bad result. Some managers, and I won't name names again, but I've been on the back end of it where a manager tried to get me in trouble because he'd just lost to a lower league team in a cup, very near to where I live, and I'm sure that people know about it. And he tried to insinuate that I'd been rude to him. Thankfully for me, the camera was being recorded, and the director said, right, okay, we better review this if the cameraman's been rude to him. And all you could hear was me saying, excuse me, do you mind just moving over a little bit just so I can get a better angle and get the advertising hall behind you? But he'd made out that I'd been really rude and I'd said, look, right, can you move there, please? And it's really disappointing because, you're there to just, I'm always polite anyway. But like I say, I'm getting away from the point. At Bournemouth, certainly when Eddie was there, win, lose or draw, he always came out with a smile and he was polite to you and he didn't make you feel uncomfortable.
Purely from a supporter's side of things, from what, obviously, we only see what's on camera. He always seems to be so polite. So that's good to know a little bit of the behind the scenes there.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'm really upset. I'm really sort of sad for the club because I think they were trying to do things in the right way. I think they were trying to play football in the right way. They've had an awful set of injuries this past season. And, without the injuries, I think they'd have still been, mid-table. I don't think they were going to break into the Europa League or certainly not the Champions League. But you have to cut your cloth accordingly. There's a lot of clubs above them that spend a lot of money for 5 years, Eddie did a fantastic job, and he still did a fantastic job last year, and I think Jason will carry that on. I think Jason will get them straight back up again.
I think it's going to be a tough season for Bournemouth. Obviously, some of the big players are moving away. We will see what a big influence Eddie Howe had on that Bournemouth squad. But yeah, you keep fingers crossed that majority of them will stay together, both on the field and off it. And obviously, all the infrastructure that they've put in behind the scenes can obviously stay, and it can continue to do well. And hopefully, we can see them come back up very, very soon.
You're listening to Pitch Talks.
Obviously, we briefly touched upon it about, the interruptions that the coronavirus has had on the sport and how everything is run at the moment. What's that been like, going to a football venue with all of these new measures put in?
Going to a stadium on a match day post the COVID lockdown has been really tricky. It's involved a lot of pre-match checks, a lot of pre-match forms to fill in, and it's just taken a little bit of the pleasure away from the match, especially when you add into it, when you're actually doing the game, there's very little atmosphere. I think it's been necessary. I certainly don't think that the wrong decisions have been made. I think it's needed to be like this. But it's made the process quite tricky in terms of certainly moving around stadiums where you can and cannot go. It's also made how you pre-plan your day trickier, because one of the things that's gone straight away for us as crew on a match day is your meals. There's no catering anymore because it's just, I think, a safety aspect that they probably can do without. So in terms of, like I was saying to you, quite a long day, you need to plan your meals a lot better, because you are probably having to take your own meals with you, because you don't really want to be turning up on site and then going off into the local area that you may or may not know, looking for somewhere to eat. You have got to be sensible that you've still got to keep yourself as safe as possible. As much as it's not really added any time to the day, what it has done, it's taken away a lot of the downtime, because you have got security checks now, you have got temperature checks, you have got forms that needed to be filled in, you have to be on camera possibly a little bit earlier just to sort of make sure that you're in position in time. Got to make sure you've got your masks. You've got to think a little bit more than just going out to your camera. Do I think it's all bad? No. I mean, in a negative way, the one plus is that getting away from a stadium has never been so easy. You go to any of the big venues, you could spend an hour sat in your car travelling half a mile. Well, now you're parked at the stadium because they want you as close to the stadium as they can for safety. And because of that, you're straight into your car after you leave the stadium, and there's no crowds, there's no cars, there's nothing. And you're literally home 45 minutes, an hour earlier from every venue than you ever were.
What would you say would be the number one thing that you love most, gets you up in the morning and goes, do you know what? I can't wait for today, or I love what I do?
As I always say in a jokey way to people, it beats getting up for a living. Every day I go to work, bar the weather conditions. The weather conditions are a downer, but it's just being amongst it. I love sport. I love live sport. And getting paid to be at these venues, when you look around and, you hear all the time about how much it costs to go and watch a game of football, and how much it costs to feed your family at a game of football, and how much a programme is. I turn up at a venue, I get given a meal, I get given a programme, and I get pretty much the best seat in the house. And on top of that, I'm getting paid. You just can't beat that. It's great. And if you can make a living out of doing that, if you can, over a course of a year, earn enough money, you can't beat it. As I said, you just can't beat this job.
I think really that, it summarises everything perfectly. And I've got one final question for you. Obviously, we spoke about the way that you got into your role and the advice you'd give to people looking to get into it as well from an assistant point of view. But if we could just summarise everything that you've said, if someone that's after listening to this podcast goes, right, this is exactly what I want to do, what would you say would be their first step?
If you're really keen at getting a job, not just in live sport, but in any form of broadcasting, I would say don't give up. Now, I know that's easy for me to say because I'm employed on a daily basis, but I wasn't always employed on a daily basis. And I did my time of writing off for jobs. And at my mum's house, I think I've still got 40, 50 rejection letters. So I think that if you really want to work in TV, you have to understand that you are going to start at the bottom. You're not going to get paid a great deal. You're going to work long hours. But I tell you what, if you stick with it, the rewards are amazing. What you get to see, where you get to go, what you get to be exposed to, It's fantastic.
Well, that's been great. I mean, I've learned so much in this, and Graham, I thank you so much for your time today. It's just been so interesting. I hope for loads of people that will listen will get a lot of motivation from this, as well as insight what it is like in your role. So that concludes another episode of Bringing You the Game. We hope you've enjoyed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Bringing You the Game by PitchTALKS. For more information on our latest episodes, careers advice, or to even get involved as a guest, get in touch with the team at mitch@pitch-talks.com. That's mitch@pitch-talks.com, or send us a message on any of our social media platforms. Thanks for tuning in. Bringing you the game. All PitchTalk content is copyright protected. PitchTALKS.